Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of our ongoing Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement series. I am Joanne Nazer, the Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement Manager here at the Washington County Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today to learn from our content expert about fundraising and reporting legal aspects. Thanks to Kathy Sable from the Washington County Bar Association for supporting this webinar, since it is a law school for nonprofits session as well. It is my pleasure to introduce Ashley Suler-Tobin. She is a strategic nonprofit professional with over 16 years of experience in program development, program management, and relationship management. As a licensed consultant for the Standards of Excellence in Pennsylvania through PANO, the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations, and nationally, she is recognized as a licensed consultant. She brings deep expertise in nonprofit governance and management for the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations Standards for Excellence program. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them either at the end or when appropriate. I want to preface this discussion saying that Ashley is not an attorney, and so she is not providing legal advice. If you do need legal advice, please contact your solicitor or attorney. Thanks so much for being here, Ashley, today. This is a very popular session today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joanne, for inviting us to speak. As you know, the Standards for Excellence is a key part of what PANO does in the nonprofit sector. And part of that is because we believe in the health of the nonprofit sector in Pennsylvania. And so the Standards for Excellence give us guidelines for how to operate as nonprofit organizations. And just recently, in the past month, we have released the newest version, the latest iteration of the Standards for Excellence. Internally, we call it 3.0. So you'll know from that that we've gone through several iterations over the many years. And this new version is much more holistic even than it was before. So if you're familiar with it, you'll remember how prescriptive it has been. And the new Standards for Excellence is less prescriptive and more inquiry based. And so you'll find a list of guiding questions in many of the documents that will help you make decisions that are specific to your organization and allow the Standards for Excellence to be adapted to your particular community that you serve. So today we are talking about resource development, and we're specifically going to cover the resource development plan and what that plan of action could look like for you, and some resources that you can find to develop a plan. Sources of income, and the new version of the standards does have a broader look at the sources of income, not just fundraising, but considering all of the sources of income for the organization. Fundraising activities, donor relationships and privacy. We're also going to talk about gift acceptance and fundraising on behalf of the organization when there's somebody who's not a staff member who's raising money for the group. I do want to read real quickly the guiding principle from the Standards for Excellence because I think it is helpful. Nonprofits need resources to do their important work in the community. Both the board and staff are responsible for securing these resources. Most nonprofits get financial support from many different sources. The way a nonprofit raises money is truthful, transparent, and responsible. The organization's resource development policies support its mission, fit with its capabilities, and respect the people it serves, while also involving donors, prospective donors, and others in the community. So those of you who are familiar with the standards will notice that the community has been brought in much more throughout this process. So let's first talk about the plan. A nonprofit needs to have a plan for how it's going to raise the money that it needs in order to operate. The plan includes evaluating the activities the organization uses to raise the funds. Maybe you have fundraising events, maybe you write grants, maybe you have individual donors, maybe there are other ways that you raise money. They all need to be considered. And it is best if you have a variety of sources. And that way, you're less at risk if one of them or several of them don't exist anymore, which many of us right now with a state budget impasse are looking at. So always sort of evaluating the diversity of your sources of income is important. The board makes sure that that resource development plan is appropriate for the organization. They, with the staff, will check it regularly and support its implementation and make sure it fits with the organization's budget, right? If you have a plan to raise $1 million, but your budget is $1.5 million, you got some problems and that needs to be reviewed. And so making sure that's always reviewed is important. But also it needs to align with the nonprofit's values and abilities. And, we always hear the story about somebody who says, but why don't we ask Bill Gates for this money? He's got a lot of money, let's give it. Well, if you don't have the ability to make that successful ask, should it be part of your plan? Always something to consider. So I want to emphasize, though, that this plan is not a do the plan and you've checked the box and you don't have to look at it again. You have to create a plan and then use the plan. So maybe the development officer is looking at this plan once a month, several times a month, and then the board looks at it quarterly. Everybody needs to also revise it. If it changes, if a situation changes dramatically, and we've all seen a lot of changes that have been dramatic this year, make changes to it so that you can still make your budget or consider other options. But it has to be a living document, right? It's not something that's set in stone. Maybe you add it to your board meeting minutes or agendas to check the development plan, the resource plan, development plan. There are ways to sort of keep it on track and keep it moving forward that you need to consider. Make sure it's always realistic. There is a template that you can use for a resource development plan in the Standards for Excellence. PANO members have free access to these documents. And after this, I'm going to send a list of the resource development packets that are related to this topic so that you can have access to them. Non-members, the documents are $25 a piece. I think many of you are members, and you'll see that that very quickly becomes valuable when you are looking for these sample documents, such as a resource development plan. And it is available in a Word version also, if you request it specifically. So then let's talk about costs. Your fundraising costs need to be reasonable over time. There's been a lot of talk over the years about, the overhead myth, and we certainly don't want anybody to think that the fundraising effectiveness ratio, the 3-to-1 ratio, is something that is the only benchmark that a nonprofit is measured on. It is a benchmark, though, and it's one, especially internally, that's helpful to make sure that your fundraising is cost efficient. That is really important in these incredibly challenging times. You've heard about the 3-to-1 ratio, and that's the amount raised divided by the fundraising expenses, the amount it takes to raise that money. Now, something to remember is that one date, if you do that today, it may not look the same next year. Maybe you had to invest in a CRM so that you can do a better job of managing your donors. Maybe there was another technology you needed to incorporate, and so your costs got higher one year. That's okay because it's over time. Think about it as a 5-year analysis. If you looked at that time, that ratio over time, you want to make sure that you can tell the story about how you made investments so that you could be more efficient in your fundraising costs. So reviewing your fundraising expenses is not a substitute for determining if an organization is working toward achieving its mission or if its programs are at all efficient or effective. There are so many factors that factor into this, including, the age of the organization, the budget size of the organization. If you're a $500,000 organization, it's going to be very hard for you to meet that 3-to-1 ratio. But also the popularity of the organization's purpose and the differences in accounting procedures. So always take into consideration all those different pieces. But ultimately, the effectiveness and efficiency of any organization's fundraising program will depend on having the right mix of fundraising activities and managing and conducting those activities well. The standards for excellence recognize that these and other complexities are implicit in the design and implementation of any fundraising program. So if you're going through the accreditation process, we're not going to hold you to, your 2025 ratio if you had to invest in some major, something to make yourself more effective and efficient going forward. We would look at a longer period of time. It is, though, helpful to make sure that your activities make sense for your organization. I'm just going to pause real quick. Do we have any questions so far?
No one has put anything in the chat as yet, Ashley, but
Okay.
I'm encouraging you again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand maybe.
Thank you. So we're going to talk more about sources of income. When a nonprofit organization decides what types of income to raise to achieve its mission, it considers the source of that income and how the income will affect the community and the people it serves. If it fits with the organization's mission, the organization also considers whether the income fits with its values, if the income is possible to secure, and if the source creates risk for the nonprofit. So, what income sources might be inconsistent with your nonprofit's mission and target population? Anybody have anything they want to throw out there? Put it in the chat. I mean, one of the classic examples is a tobacco company providing grants for a group that's fighting cancer among teenagers, for example, where smoking rates are always a consideration. Knowing what those potential risks are is really important. Anybody have any ideas or potential inconsistencies? Okay, I'll keep going. One of the things to consider when you're thinking about risks is the loss of other funders. If one is considered maybe not in line with your values, that other funders might look at you differently and might decide not to fund you in the future, but also the potential harm to individuals that you're working with and working to serve. Some sources of income may carry more risk than your nonprofit wishes to hold. And that's, I've heard a lot of people very interested in cryptocurrency and things like that. There's a lot of risk associated with that. I certainly know of organizations that are taking donations from cryptocurrency, but they're converting it into US dollars as they receive it, which reduces some of the volatility there. Always consider the risks of depending on one source of income. We talked about that in the previous slide. Problems with prompt payment. We can certainly see that with the Pennsylvania budget impasse. If you have a state contract, there will be problems with prompt payment, but also problems that occur when one income source expires or just ceases to exist. That happens too. Maybe it's funding that you thought was going to be over several years, and it went away. Having multiple sources of income is always going to serve you well. So fundraising solicitations. A nonprofit's fundraising materials are accurate, honest, respectful to the community, and correctly state who the organization is, what its mission is, and how the donated money will be used. I'm sure that not all of us put all of this into our solicitations, but it is important to do. And a lot of times it's legally required. Also, the nonprofit organization keeps its promises about how it will use donations. If you say that a donation is going to be used to, you know, fund food in the food bank, but instead it's used to support another program, you need to reconsider what that solicitation wording looks like. And when a nonprofit asks for donations, it does not pressure people. And it is respectful and sensitive to the needs and interests of the people and communities it serves, as well as its donors. So you'll notice that there's a shift in the thinking here where donors for most of fundraising history have been first and foremost in resource development. And there is a growing movement to make sure that the community is represented in your thinking. It's a key part of the new standards going forward. So I'm sure all of us have received solicitations, mailings, phone calls, asking for money that seemed questionable. Maybe you questioned the accuracy of its claims. Um, Maybe you felt there was undue pressure or inappropriate pressure. Um, did you feel like the donors were being respected? I know I've received certainly phone calls from organizations raising money where, and even have gotten postcards and other mailings from folks where the level of shame was very high and it felt inappropriate to me. And that's what we don't want to do, right? Anytime you're turning off your donors, you're not representing your mission or your values well. Really think long and hard about that. So think about what
Actually,
kind, yes.
I had a question about that.
Mhm.
So I think some of the nonprofits may, and we have a diverse group on the call, and some are trying to think about expanding their donor base or something like that. Do you want to talk about purchasing of list, or um, how does that come into play?
So there are a number of ethical ways that you can purchase lists, and usually that's through a list management company. I am not an expert in those types of direct mail solicitations, but those lists are available to you. It is not ethical to use contact information of people that don't know that their name is being shared. And so, be very careful of that. You certainly don't want to poach other people's donors or names or contacts. You want to make sure that people know that that they have a business relationship with you and not with somebody maybe that has received your mailing list. Uh, it- it- Again, respecting your donors is a big part of this work. Does that answer your question, Joanne?
Yes, thank you.
Good, good,
Appreciate it.
good. Another key point for solicitations and acknowledgements of donations is that all of your solicitations must have all legally required disclosure statements addressing whether or not your contribution is deductible as a charitable contribution and whether or not a nonprofit is properly registered in Pennsylvania in our case. The Standards for Excellence educational resource packet called Disclose It outlines all you need to know about required disclosure language for your solicitations and receipts. So in Pennsylvania, when you register, there is very specific language that you need to have on the solicitation that goes out. It is long and a lot of words, but it is required and you do need to have it. And when you send out your acknowledgments, your thank you letters, you need to disclose whether that donation is a charitable deduction or open for a charitable deduction or not.
I know most nonprofits do put it in very little, small size font, but you're right.
Which is
It has
okay.
to be there. Yes. And Ashley, we did get a question.
Mhm.
And can you give another example about how not to pressure people into making a donation?
Well, I think the best guidance I can give is to switch roles. Uh, if you received that donation, would you feel pressured? Remember, communication is also mostly about the recipient. So looking at it not just about how do I get the most money, but how would I feel if I received this solicitation? At least that's the rule of thumb that I always use in looking at things and um, making sure that aligns with the organization's values.
Good point. Good point.
Okay, so if there are no other questions on that, let's talk about donor relationships. So nonprofits make sure the needs of the people and communities they serve are the most important part of their efforts to raise money. Nonprofits avoid situations where donors make gifts in ways that give the donor too much power over the organization or go against the organization's values. So it's something now that we are addressing much more clearly, that undue influence on the organization is not something we're looking for in a donor relationship, right? You want to make sure that your community is represented well and your organization's values are represented well. Um, you also need to make sure you understand your community. So in other parts of the Standards for Excellence and other educational resource packets, we talk and provide resources for how to involve the community in the work that you're doing, how to make sure that your board is representative, how to make sure your staff is representative, and all the different pieces throughout. So as an example, PANO is a statewide organization. And as such, we need to make sure that we are statewide in all of our operations. So our board has people from all parts of Pennsylvania. Our Standards for Excellence Committee has people from all parts of Pennsylvania. Our peer review committee for people that are going through the accreditation process has representatives from all parts of Pennsylvania. All throughout the PANO organization, we're making sure that there is representation across the state because we want to make sure that we have all the voices possible. We don't want to be heavy in the cities, right? Where Pennsylvania often gets caught up, right? We don't want to be Philadelphia and Pittsburgh dominant. We need to make sure all of the voices are represented. And so all of us can do this work with our nonprofits to make sure that the community's interests are well represented. Also, nonprofits respect donors' rights to choose how their name and contact information are used. So this gets back to the list question. This includes letting donors remain anonymous, allowing donors to remove themselves from solicitation lists, and hopefully make it easy. And excuse me, and allowing donors to have their name taken off any lists that are sold, rented, or shared. Okay, that gets again back to that question about lists. Nonprofits follow the wishes of donors about how any kind of donation, including money, goods, property, cryptocurrency, stocks, etc., is used. You don't have to accept all of these types of donations, right? We'll get to that next in the gift acceptance policy, but you need to be honest in how you're using it. So major areas covered in donor relationships and donor privacy includes safeguarding donor privacy, providing donors the opportunity to remain anonymous. This has blown up recently in my own family, where my mother made a donation that she considered anonymous and the development team considered anonymous. Somebody outside of that talked about the amount of the donation, and it made it into a newspaper article for a very small community. It was incredibly distressing. Thankfully, the organization moved very quickly to make amends, and there were apologies all over the place. But it was really embarrassing. It was really, especially when you're working in small communities, it was a very hard thing to realize that a number of people might have seen that story. And it can be anybody, right? If you start talking outside the development office about anonymous gifts, if board members don't understand that a gift is anonymous, you really need to lock down on that because it's going to affect future donations. Also, you need to honor requests to curtail repeated solicitations. I do this all the time, right? I give to the local public radio station, and I specifically ask that they not include me in their solicitations because I'm going to give annually, but I don't need to get all of their mail about it. And I feel bad about it every time, but it makes my life a lot better not receiving all of those solicitations. So you also have to make it easy for them. So if somebody says, I don't want to receive this, you need to um, have it as one click. There are email rules about unsubscribe, being in every email that goes out. Most of us are using a service that requires this. The Constant Contact, MailChimp, and all these different services have that built into their systems. But if you're sending blast emails out and it doesn't have an unsubscribe option, you need to check that and make sure that it is easy. I have a newspaper subscription that I no longer continue because in order to cancel it, I had to call their office and talk to 2 different people in order to cancel a subscription. It was not easy, and I will not resubscribe as a result. And I come from a newspaper family too, so it was really distressing for me. And now so many of them are nonprofits, right? They're not following it.
Actually, as you're talking about this, do you have a general guideline on number of touches or contacts or solicitations per year?
I don't. And I know that there's some thinking in development offices about, more asks is better, and any ask not made is, a lost opportunity. And I totally understand all of that. It's much more about honoring the requests of the donor when they say that they don't want to receive the solicitation to remove them promptly. But yeah, sometimes, especially, around December, right? There's increased need to make lots of asks. I think the thing to consider is that so many organizations are making asks at the same time. It becomes a little overwhelming, and it might get noisy for you also. So think about what that looks like on your results too. Um, do any of the organizations on the call today rent or sell their mailing lists? I'm seeing some shaked heads. It doesn't seem like a common practice, and oftentimes it's larger organizations that do that. I ask that because donors tend to appreciate when nonprofits do not sell or rent or exchange their mailing lists with others. And it just increases confidence in the organization. So let's talk about acceptance of gifts. A gift acceptance policy is something that I look for with an organization if I'm going to serve on the board. And the reason for that is because if you have a gift acceptance policy, it means you're being thoughtful about your gifts, and it means that you have permission to say no to gifts that aren't appropriate. So let me read you what the code says. It says the organization has policies about what to do with donations it receives. These policies include how to decide if it will accept a gift from certain individuals or organizations, the process for receiving a gift, what the donation will be used for, what kinds of property it will accept, and whether it accepts a special or unexpected gift based on its mission, values, and abilities. Now, we have a sample gift acceptance policy in the educational resource packets that I highly recommend. It is incredibly valuable to have this document. It's especially valuable when you have a donor who's a longtime donor or a high net worth individual or the potential to be a high net worth individual who offers you something that you cannot accept. I have been involved with a park group in my local community, and one time a neighbor offered to donate a piano. And there was a community building within the park, and this donor was sure that the piano would be a great asset to that community building. Unfortunately, the piano was never tuned, at least to the owner's knowledge. We did not know anybody who could tune it, nor did we have a budget to tune the piano. Additionally, we had no one who knew how to play the piano. So it became a storage item and not something that could be used by the community. And I think everybody had excellent ideas for it, and it sounded in theory like a great idea. Unfortunately, the logistics of it overwhelmed everybody involved, and it became a burden. It became something that we don't know what we're going to do with it. The donor was very upset because they did not understand why we didn't want this piano. We did not have a gift acceptance policy that said how we would handle gifts and how we could, accept or not accept gifts that were outside the scope of the park group. And that's really what it came down to, was that the scope never included music. The scope never included a piano or piano tuning or anything like that. The scope of the park was positive uses of the park grounds. And unfortunately, the piano could not be on the park grounds. So if we had had a gift acceptance policy, we would have been able to have a very black and white conversation about how the gift fell outside of the scope. And it would have taken it out of the emotional and hurt feelings. So a gift acceptance policy provides procedures for determining the limits on gift acceptance, such as the scope of your mission, that type of thing, the purposes for which donations will be accepted, the types of properties accepted, and accepting or refusing unanticipated gifts, such as that piano. So very useful to have on hand. Any questions about the gift acceptance policy? Okay, so fundraising on behalf of the organization. This is really important. It's the responsibility of the nonprofit organization to ensure that it monitors all of those individuals who raise funds on behalf of it, and that contractors are registered with the state. So that means that you are monitoring your board members, your volunteers, your staff members who are asking for money in the community. It also means that you are contracting with people, if you have contracted fundraisers, who are registered with Pennsylvania as they are required if they are fundraisers. I know that there are lots of nonprofits that are not following this, and I know there are lots of consultants that are not following this. And so I raise this as a way to direct people to the Pennsylvania resources that will help people get registered as fundraising consultants. we understand, everybody understands that nonprofits get help from all your staff, all your volunteers, consultants, contractors, or other organizations when raising money. For example, libraries have friends groups, and there might be, the high school volleyball team that wants to raise money on your behalf. There are always going to be these outside organizations that want to help you raise money. The nonprofit is responsible of making sure that everyone who helps raise the money follows your own policies and obeys the laws. When an organization hires a consultant to help it raise money, it only uses the services of people who are properly registered with the appropriate state authority here in Pennsylvania to do this kind of work. And there is a list, you can do a search on the Pennsylvania website to find out if somebody is registered. You also make sure that people are paid fairly and equitably. To stay true to the organization's mission and to avoid questionable practices. The staff and consultants who work on raising resources for the organization are not paid based on a percentage of the amount of money they raise or on a commission. Now, the question always comes up, what about bonuses? Bonuses can be structured in a way that are ethical, that make sense. But a commission on a grant written, for example, or a commission on the dollars raised from an individual is not okay. The Association of Fundraising Professionals has this in their guidelines, and we have an entire educational resource packet about it if you want to present it to anybody. It's really important that you have agreements with any outside organization that's going to raise money for you. So that volleyball team at the high school that wants to raise money, make sure that you have an agreement in place. And in the educational resource packets that we offer, there are sample agreements that are really very simple, but it outlines the use of your logo, the use of your name, that the logo cannot be changed for the t-shirt that they're making and selling. It outlines the amount of money they expect to raise and how they're going to be presenting it to the public. Because really, these folks are acting as your agents, and so you want to make sure that that is structured well and that um, volunteers understand what you need in order for it to be respectful and presentable in the public.
Ashley, we have another question in the chat, and
Okay.
it says, should the agreement be a signed document in writing for third-party fundraisers?
Yes, I believe in that wholeheartedly. It doesn't have to be a complicated agreement. It can be a form that is signed by both parties. What we used to do at an organization I used to work for is we had a form that people would complete that would describe their fundraiser and how much they expected to raise and where they would be advertising it, that type of thing. So that when somebody came to us and said that they had donated, with the volleyball team, we would know what was going on. That form became the contract. And so it really was not complicated at all. And oftentimes you can create something like that in SurveyMonkey or in Google Forms, so that it makes it a lot easier for people, because you don't want it to be an undue burden for these very generous people who are out fundraising for you. But you do want to make sure that there's an understanding, because you can write into some of those forms what your expectations are also. I hope that's helpful. Any other questions about fundraising on behalf of the organization? Because we're going to move into the question period, because we've covered all the pertinent points.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think it was a thorough presentation on all the highlights. And as you talk about diversifying resources now, and it's kind of a scramble right now, is there any quick tips or anything that you can suggest?
I've had a couple of conversations with organizations. where they are concerned that particular funders aren't interested in their target audience or the people that are benefiting from their services. But after we talked a little bit longer, we realized that they could describe the services that they're providing differently. This one organization was providing programs for young women, leadership programs for young women. And they said, there's some concern about just targeting women, and but that's what we do, and that's what our mission is. And as we started talking, it it became very apparent that they were actually a core part of their services was civil discourse. They provided leadership training to such a diverse group of young women that they were all learning how to talk to each other in different ways. And they all came from different perspectives and different economic backgrounds. And being able to have those difficult conversations and to have conversations at all is incredibly valuable. And the leadership that those young women got out of that it was just extraordinary. And so in that conversation, she was able to breathe new air into the work that she was doing. They were already doing the work. It is not contrary to their mission to talk about what they're getting out of it differently.
I think that, that executive directors, CEOs are so focused on sometimes their programs and things like that, that we do need to take a higher level viewpoint of what really what we're offering and really what you can talk about. And I know before we started this session, Ashley, we talked about advocacy and lobbying, which are
Mhm.
legal for nonprofits, but to make sure that they know their legislators and people of influence in their community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Your people of influence and your legislators, your elected officials also often know sources of income. And having those conversations and making sure they're aware of the work you're doing is really, really important. That said, there are a number of people that I work with who also believe that if you are not advocating on behalf of your community, you're not actually doing the work of a nonprofit organization, because that is the legal structure of a nonprofit organization. And so getting out there and advocating on their behalf is incredibly important. And we don't always know how to do that and how to do it well and how to do it within the legal confines of our structure. Panel offers a multitude of webinars on advocacy and lobbying that you can tap into to learn more. Also, membership automatically includes the advocacy and lobbying work that PANO does on behalf of nonprofits across the state. And so there will always be calls for that type of work that you can do for the entire sector as a whole.
I do want to give a shout out to Pano, and during these challenging times with, as Ashley said, there's not a federal budget, not a state budget, that they have been advocating and being present for these conversations nationally and statewide. So we appreciate that. But just like a general suggestion is that, you can have people come to your office, see your work if appropriate, and getting your message out clearly through your website, social media, having different avenues, and just keep bringing people in, talking about what you do.
And it doesn't need to be, I remember thinking that the legislators would only want to know when there was something big happening. And actually, they really appreciated when there wasn't something big happening, because there wasn't a big ask that I was making. I was just going in to inform them about the work that was ongoing and the people we were serving. I do want to circle back too to sort of how do we think differently about some of our programs and think differently about sources of income. I wonder if our community can help us think differently about how we present our programs and how we talk about what we do. I often think as I give presentations like this that um, the people we serve, the beneficiaries of our services, probably talk about what they get out of receiving services differently than we do. And I think it's a great exercise to get out and about and talk to some of the people that you serve to find out what they get out of it. Because you might find that it facilitates education in their home when that isn't the purpose of getting food on the table, right? Which is what you focus, whatever it is, like you might get a different perspective on your work that could be refreshing and help you find a new source of income.
So just another practical question, Ashley, is how do you think maybe some nonprofits who haven't done the steps to take a resource development plan, what would be some suggestions of points that you would like to see in a plan?
Really, it's pretty straightforward. Is looking at your budget and how much you need to raise, how much revenue you need to bring in, and then I used to always say, do the math. What is it going to take to raise that money? So if you need to raise $200,000, do you have one donor who's going to give you $200,000? Likely not. So then how does it break down? You probably have some history in your books and what your fundraising events bring in and what your individual donors and what your grants bring in. And so just adding all of that up and the effort that it's going to take to get all those pieces in place. And if there's a gap, then figuring out what technique you're going to use to raise that money that's in that gap.
So some of the organizations on the call may not have many development people,
Mhm.
full-time staff development people, and uh, how about just giving everybody a pep talk, Ashley, about how how they can um, be resource development officers and talk to everybody in the community. And I think some people sometimes I always thought I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking
Mhm.
for the organization. How would you encourage people to necessarily maybe think of your vendors, think of other people other than your family, of course, but other people who would be supporting the organization?
Yeah, there's that old fundraising adage of you start close to home first. And once you move past your family, right? But you want to start, the people that know you best and going through and thinking really widely about who knows us best. Maybe your building is located near a manufacturing plant, or maybe your building is close to something else, right? And it's a group that you've never thought of. I once worked at an office that was in downtown Philadelphia, and none of the neighbors knew who we were because our services were being delivered in other parts of the city. And we just happened to have this historical building that we'd been in for 125 years. And many of the neighbors had not obviously been around for 125 years and didn't know what our logo and name meant. So we hosted an open house and got new volunteers who ended up coming and delivering Christmas presents for children, wrapping presents for the delivery of those Christmas presents. Like it became much more of a community space. And so, when you think about who's closest to your organization, it's not just family, right? It's your board members, who your board members care to speak to, the dinner parties they go to, the clubs they frequent, the social interactions they have, the physicality of your space, the impact. But I think also it's uh, getting out and getting that burst of enthusiasm from the people who are benefiting from your services. I can't tell you how many times people have told me that spending a day in the field, spending a day or several, like one day a month is how they get their energy to do their fundraising. To go and hear the stories from people that are so grateful that you exist and that your mission is there to serve the community. It gives you stories and it reconnects you to the mission, and it reconnects all of your donors and all of your potential donors to the mission, and it will absolutely make a difference for you.
So really what you're saying that everybody on the team in your nonprofit, volunteers, board members, can uh, be more providing these success stories and talking about it in the community, and then
Well,
expanding the vision of the organization.
absolutely. The vision and the reach. Absolutely.
Are there any other questions that you'd like to pose? Ashley and I are having a great time talking. Yeah.
We're going to start a podcast, Joanne, right?
Sounds fabulous.
So I am going to send a list with links to Joanne of the educational resource packets that are available that are specifically related to the resource development topic. And I will also include a PDF of this presentation in case that would be helpful to you. And if there's anything else that you might find helpful, please let me or Joanne know. I do encourage you to visit pano.org, our website, and consider membership. There are so many reasons to be involved right now. Advocacy and lobbying work that Pano is doing on behalf of organizations across the state as just one example, especially with the
Yes.
state budget impasse.
Right, right. And I just want to thank Ashley so much that this turned out to be very timely. I think we talked about this last
Mm-hmm.
year, and
Mm-hmm.
just, it turned out to be a very timely presentation, and just appreciate your expertise in this area, Ashley. And just, we just want to encourage everyone to spread the story. And then, you know, then we believe that funding will come.
Yeah.
Keep telling your story, that you're building relationships one to another, and that funding will come. So, this particularly critical issue, we appreciate it, Ashley. So the next session for our nonprofit leadership and engagement series will be Tuesday, November 4th at noon on investments, endowments, and lines of credit, because you've done so much
Mhm.
great resource development. So you have a couple weeks to work that out and get on that matter. Thanks to all who participated in the session today, and thanks again to Ashley for an outstanding presentation. As she said, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to the foundation, or by phone or email. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joanne, for hosting this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.